My name is Daniel Whitmore. I am 41 years old, and at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening I heard my mother say to my sister-in-law, "We pre-ordered for all the grandchildren except Elijah. Daniel's boy doesn't need the same treatment. He's not really growing up in this family anyway." To my brother's wife, Vanessa, in the private dining room at Ashworth's Steakhouse, while they believed I was still in the parking lot helping my son find his jacket in the back seat. The steaks at Ashworth's run $120 a plate, pre-ordered, for every grandchild at that table except mine. I was standing in the service hallway, 6 feet from the hostess station, holding Elijah's jacket in one hand. I could smell the char from the kitchen grill and the lavender from the restroom diffuser mixing in the air between the swinging doors. My mother's voice carried the way it always does when she's arranging logistics, not loud, administrative. Something in my chest locked into a position I recognized from work. The same stillness that comes over me when I'm reading a pressure differential that shouldn't exist in a system someone told me was fine. I didn't move. I stood there holding that small blue jacket with the dinosaur patch on the sleeve, and I was already counting backwards through every family dinner of the last 3 years, recalculating what I had called forgetfulness. Before I tell you what I decided in that stillness, tell me, what time is it where you are? And have you ever heard something you weren't supposed to hear? Because what you do in the next moment defines everything that follows. I am a pipeline integrity engineer. I inspect pressurized systems for a living: oil, gas, municipal water. My job is to find the fracture nobody can see before it becomes the catastrophe everybody can feel. I carry an ultrasonic thickness gauge in my truck the way other men carry a spare phone charger. I can hear a frequency change in a weld seam the way a piano tuner hears a flat note in a concert hall. I read corrosion maps. I follow hairline cracks through steel walls that look perfect from the outside. That skill had kept municipalities safe and kept pipelines from splitting open under 900 psi for 15 years. It was about to find the fracture running through my own family. I walked Elijah into that dining room like I hadn't heard a thing. My son, 8 years old, walked to the long table where his cousins, Bryn, Chloe, and Marcus, already had plates being set in front of them. $120 ribeyes, each one pre-ordered to temperature. Bryn's medium rare, Chloe's well done because she's particular. Marcus had the filet with the peppercorn crust because my brother Grant's kids get the filet. Elijah's place had a napkin, a glass of water, no menu, no plate incoming. My mother, Judith Whitmore, seated at the head with her reading glasses pushed into her silver hair, smiled at me the way she smiles at a contractor she's about to redirect. "Oh, Daniel, we finalized the orders earlier today. The kids' meals were pre-arranged with the restaurant this morning. I'm sure they have a children's menu if Elijah's hungry." I looked at my son. He was watching Marcus cut into a steak that cost more than his school shoes. His hands were in his lap, flat, still, the posture of a child who has learned not to ask. "Got it," I said. That was their fourth mistake. I had logged the first 3 over 18 months without realizing I was keeping count. Let me tell you who my family is, because it matters to how this worked for so long. My mother retired from school administration 15 years ago and runs the Whitmore family the way she ran Eastlake Elementary: org charts, delegated authority, annual reviews nobody asked for. My father Richard died 9 years ago and left everything to her in trust, which she manages with the precision of a woman who taught herself QuickBooks at 62. Grant is my older brother by 4 years. He married Vanessa, who comes from money that shows in her posture. They have 3 children. Grant runs the family's rental properties, 4 units my father bought in the 80s, under my mother's oversight. He gets a management fee. The properties stay in the trust. The arrangement keeps him employed in a way that looks like ambition if you don't examine it closely. I married Nina when I was 26. Elijah came 3 years later. Nina left when Elijah was 4, not dramatically, just completely. Moved to Portland, calls on birthdays, sends gifts that arrive late. I don't speak about her with bitterness because I used mine up years ago, and what's left is just the schedule. For 5 years I've raised my son alone in a rental duplex 11 minutes from my mother's house. I've attended every family dinner, every holiday, every birthday. I've written checks for family events I couldn't afford. I've driven my mother to appointments when Grant was busy, which was always. I've maintained the plumbing in those rental units at no charge because my mother said family doesn't invoice family. The irony beat lands here, and I want you to hear it clearly. I spend my professional life identifying invisible weaknesses in systems that look structurally sound from the outside. I use ultrasonic waves to find corrosion hiding behind clean paint. I measure wall thickness to the tenth of a millimeter to determine if something is about to fail catastrophically. And for 5 years, I lived inside a family system that was corroding from the inside out, and I called it love because the surface was painted so well. The Tuesday after the steakhouse, I went home and did something I'd never done. I opened my laptop and made a spreadsheet. Not of grievances, I'm not built for that, of expenditures. Mine, specifically, toward the family. Monthly contributions to Dad's memorial fund, which my mother said covered property taxes on the family home. Cash gifts at every grandchild's birthday, all 4 of them, equal amounts, because I believed in equal. Holiday hosting costs when it was my turn, which came around twice as often as Grant's. The plumbing work, which I finally estimated at an hourly rate I'd charge any client. The number at the bottom was $47,000 over 5 years. I stared at it for a long time. Something in me was running calculations I hadn't asked it to run, not about the money itself, but about the exchange rate, what $47,000 had purchased for Elijah in terms of belonging. The answer, measured in steaks not ordered for him, was nothing. But there was one more thing said in that hallway at Ashworth's. After the line about Elijah, my mother had added something to Vanessa in a lower register, almost an afterthought. Besides, once we finalize the education accounts next month, the distributions are already allocated. Daniel doesn't need to know the details. Education accounts. Distributions. Allocated. I'll come back to that. First, let me tell you how long this had been happening. Elijah's 3rd birthday party was held at my mother's house. I brought the cake, homemade, because Nina had just left and I was proving something to myself about being enough. My mother served it on paper plates while Grant's kids got their slices on the good china. I told myself it was because Elijah was younger, messier. That was year 1. Year 2, Christmas morning, gift bags under my mother's tree. Bryn received a $200 art easel. Chloe got the American Girl doll she'd been asking about since September. Marcus unwrapped a drone. Elijah's bag contained a coloring book and a pack of markers from the drugstore with the clearance sticker still on the spine. My mother said, "Little boys are so easy to please." And I believed her because believing her was cheaper than the alternative. Year 3, the family vacation. My mother rented a beach house in Outer Banks, 4 bedrooms, ocean view. Grant's family got the primary suite. My mother took the second. I was told there wasn't room for Elijah and me, but we were welcome to visit for the day. It was a week-long rental. We came for Saturday. I logged these things the way I log anomalous readings on a pipeline inspection, noting them, flagging them, but not yet declaring a failure. Because in my industry, you don't shut down a system on one reading. You need a pattern. You need data across time. I had the pattern. I'd had it for years. I just hadn't been willing to write the report. The week after the steakhouse dinner, I started looking for what my mother meant by education accounts. My father's trust documents had been filed with a local attorney, Martin Calloway, whose office I'd visited once after my father died. I'd been handed a summary then, a single page showing the trust's general structure, 4 rental properties, my mother as sole trustee, distributions at her discretion for family welfare and education. I requested the full trust document, not the summary, the original. Martin Calloway's paralegal emailed me a 46-page PDF that had been sitting in their system for 9 years. I read it the way I read an inspection report, every clause, every addendum, every amendment filed since inception. Article 7, Section 3. The trustee shall maintain education savings accounts for each grandchild of the grantor, funded equally from trust income, for the purpose of post-secondary education. Each grandchild, equally. I called my mother's financial advisor, a man named Philip Drennan whose number was listed in the trust document as the account administrator. I identified myself, gave my father's trust number, and asked a simple question: how many education accounts are currently active under this trust? 3, he said. Bryn, Chloe, and Marcus. I asked about Elijah. There was a pause, a keyboard clicking. "I don't show a fourth beneficiary account," he said carefully. "The trustee's instructions have only ever referenced 3 grandchildren." I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a job site with my hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and I felt the same thing I feel when an ultrasonic reading comes back showing 40% wall loss on a line that was certified as sound 6 months ago. Not surprise, confirmation. The system had been compromised long before I started testing it. That evening, I pulled the trust's annual accounting statements, which, as a beneficiary's parent, I was entitled to request. Philip Drennan sent them within 48 hours, 7 years of filings. The numbers told a story my mother had been editing for nearly a decade: trust income, rental revenue from 4 properties in a college town, averaged $94,000 annually. Distributions to the 3 education accounts, $8,000 each per year. That's $24,000 allocated to Grant's children. Distributions to Elijah, 0, every year, for every year of his life. But the trust's outflows didn't match. $94,000 in, $24,000 to education accounts. Property maintenance averaged $15,000. Trustee fees, my mother paid herself $12,000 annually, which the trust allowed. That left roughly $43,000 per year unaccounted for in the education line items. I traced it. It took me 3 evenings and 4 phone calls to property management contacts, but I traced it. The missing income was flowing into a brokerage account titled Whitmore Family Legacy Fund, an account not mentioned anywhere in the original trust document, an account my mother had opened 18 months after my father died, funding it with trust income she had sole discretion to direct. The account's beneficiaries, listed in the brokerage paperwork Philip Drennan finally confirmed after I cited my legal standing: Grant Whitmore, Vanessa Whitmore, Bryn, Chloe, and Marcus Whitmore. Not Daniel, not Elijah. My father built that trust to protect all of us equally. My mother had spent 9 years quietly restructuring it into a system where my son didn't exist. I drove to Martin Calloway's office on a Thursday morning. I sat across from a man who'd known my father for 30 years, and I laid out what I'd found. He was quiet for a long time, then he pulled off his glasses and said something I will never forget. "Your father sat in that same chair when he set up the trust." He made me read Article 7 back to him twice. He said, "Every grandchild, Martin, even the ones I haven't met yet." Those were his words. Martin told me that as a beneficiary, Elijah being a named class member under the trust's grandchild provision, I had standing to petition for an accounting review and, if necessary, removal of the trustee for breach of fiduciary duty. He also told me something else. In the original trust document, there was a provision my mother had never mentioned to anyone. If the trustee was found to have materially deviated from the trust's stated purpose, a majority of adult beneficiaries could vote to replace her. There were 2 adult beneficiaries, me and Grant. I didn't need Grant's vote. Martin explained that a court could remove a trustee independently upon showing of breach, but Grant's cooperation would make it faster, cleaner, and avoid the cost of litigation my mother would almost certainly fund with the trust itself. I wasn't going to ask Grant for anything. Not yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what I was standing in. The almost correct flaw revealed itself in the brokerage paperwork. The Whitmore Family Legacy Fund had been opened with a trust certification letter, a document that told the brokerage firm this account was authorized under the trust. I requested a copy of that certification. It arrived as a PDF, and the moment I opened it, my training fired like a reflex. The letter was on Martin Calloway's firm letterhead. It bore what appeared to be Martin's signature. It referenced the trust by its correct number. It cited Article 9, a provision that does authorize the trustee to open investment accounts for trust purposes. But the signature's middle initial was wrong. Martin Calloway signs M.J. Calloway. The certification letter read M.T. Calloway. And when I called Martin and read him the document, his voice went flat in a way I recognized, the same way a site supervisor sounds when you tell him his pipeline has been leaking for 6 months. "I never wrote that letter," he said, "and I never certified that account." My mother had forged an attorney's certification to open a brokerage account funded with trust money earmarked for all grandchildren, and directed it exclusively to Grant's family. The document was almost correct, The trust number was right. The letterhead was right. Even the signature looked right. But the middle initial, one letter, told the truth. Someone who wasn't Martin Calloway had created this document, and they'd worked from memory rather than from a reference copy. I had her. 3 weeks of evidence, 4 layers deep. The surface insult, my son excluded from a dinner order. The hidden setup, education accounts deliberately withheld. The older pattern, 9 years of systematic exclusion from trust distributions. The deeper fraud, a forged certification letter enabling the redirection of my father's legacy away from his own grandson. My brother Grant called me on a Sunday night. This was unusual. Grant and I spoke at family events and in brief texts about property maintenance. He didn't call. He particularly didn't call at 9 p.m. on a Sunday with his voice pitched low the way people talk when they're in a room they might be overheard in. Mom told me you've been asking Philip questions about the trust. I waited. She's concerned you're going to make this into something it doesn't need to be. I said nothing. Danny, look, I know the dinner thing was bad. I told Vanessa that was wrong. But this trust stuff, Mom's managed it fine for years. Dad would have wanted. Grant, I said. Did you know there's no education account for Elijah? Silence. The kind that answers before words do. I'm going to ask you one time, I said. Did you know? Mom said, she said you'd opted out, that you told her you were handling Elijah's education yourself, that you didn't want trust involvement. I never said that. I was never asked. The conversation he was referencing had never occurred. I never said that, Grant. More silence. Then, very quietly, yeah, I think I knew that. He hung up. And I let him go, because Grant was standing at the top of a decision he'd been avoiding for 9 years, and I couldn't push him over it. He had to step. My mother's annual trust dinner was scheduled for the last Saturday in October, held every year at her home, the house my father built in 1987, in the dining room with the walnut table he'd made by hand. She used this dinner to present the year's trust performance to the family, like a CEO addressing shareholders. Grant attended with Vanessa. I attended alone. The children stayed home with sitters. This year I brought a guest. Martin Calloway had agreed to attend. Not as my attorney, as the trust's drafting attorney, exercising his professional obligation to ensure the instrument's integrity. My mother had never met Martin in person. All their communication had been by mail. I arrived at my mother's house at 6. The dining room table was set with the good china, 8 places, though only 6 people usually sat. Candles lit, a printed agenda at each seat, as always. My mother in her gray cashmere cardigan, her reading glasses on a chain, a glass of white wine already poured. Daniel, she said, the way she says my name when she's already decided the conversation's direction. I'm glad you came. We have things to discuss. We do, I said. I brought someone. Martin Calloway stepped through the front door behind me. 68 years old, gray suit, leather briefcase, 30 years of trust law in his posture. My mother looked at him with the expression of someone whose seating chart has just been violated. Judith, Martin said pleasantly, we've corresponded for years. I thought it was time we spoke in person about Richard's trust. My mother's hand went to her wine glass and stayed there. I wasn't aware this was that kind of dinner. It's exactly the kind of dinner it's always been, I said. You review the trust's performance. Martin's here to verify. Grant arrived 10 minutes later. He looked at Martin, looked at me, looked at his mother. Something crossed his face. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition of a man who has walked into a room where the polite version of events is no longer available. We sat. My mother began her usual presentation: rental income, maintenance costs, education account performance for the 3 grandchildren. She read from a printed summary, voice smooth, glasses perched on her nose. When she finished, I said, you referenced 3 education accounts. Yes. The trust requires 4, Article 7, Section 3. My mother removed her glasses, slowly, the way she does when she's decided someone has made an error she will now correct. Daniel, we discussed this years ago. You preferred to handle Elijah's education independently. I respected that. When did we discuss it? I don't recall the exact date, but we never discussed it. There is no email, no letter, no text. I've checked. Grant shifted in his chair. Vanessa studied her napkin. My mother's voice cooled by 1 degree. This is not the venue for accusations. I agree, I said. It's the venue for accounting, which is why I asked about the Whitmore Family Legacy Fund. The room changed temperature. My mother's spine straightened a 1/4 inch. Grant looked at the table. Vanessa looked at Grant. That fund, my mother said carefully, is an investment vehicle authorized under Article 9. Authorized by whom? Martin asked. His voice was mild, professional. The voice of a man reading from a deposition outline. Authorized under the trust's broad investment discretion, my mother said. Martin opened his briefcase. He removed a single sheet of paper in a clear document sleeve. This is the certification letter submitted to the brokerage firm to open that account. It bears my letterhead, my signature, and a middle initial I have never used in 40 years of legal practice. He set it on the walnut table my father had built. The silence lasted 7 seconds. I counted. My mother looked at the document, then at Martin, then at me. That letter was prepared by my financial advisor on my instruction. Any clerical error. It isn't a clerical error, Martin said. It's a forged legal certification. I've confirmed with my office that no such letter was ever drafted, authorized, or sent. Grant stood up, then sat back down. His hands were flat on the table. Mom. Grant, sit down. This is Daniel's doing. He's always been jealous, I said. Unstable? Confused? She turned to me with the full weight of 30 years of administration. Dramatic? You have always made everything dramatic. A dinner, a seating arrangement, now this. If you needed money for Elijah's school, you could have simply asked. I didn't need money for Elijah's school. Elijah was entitled to it, under the trust Dad built specifically to include him. Your father's wishes. Your father, Martin interjected gently, made me read Article 7 back to him twice. He said every grandchild. He said even the ones I haven't met yet. My mother went still. Not the performative stillness of a woman deciding her next move. The stillness of someone hearing a dead man's voice come back into a room she thought she controlled. Vanessa spoke for the first time. Judith, the letter. Vanessa, this is a family matter. The letter is forged, Vanessa said. Flat, clear. Something had shifted in her face, the look of a woman recalculating what her children's education fund was actually built on. That changes things. My mother attempted recovery. Her voice softened. She reached across the table toward me. Daniel, sweetheart, we can work this out within the family. There's no need for lawyers, for courts. I'll open Elijah's account tomorrow. I'll backfill it. Whatever you need, generosity. Arriving only after exposure. The final tactic. I looked at my mother across my father's table. I said one sentence. You decided that my son's place in this family was worth exactly $0 for 9 years, and you forged a document to make sure it stayed that way. Then I was quiet. I didn't elaborate. I let the sentence sit on the walnut table next to the forged certification like 2 documents filed side by side. Grant spoke into the silence. I want an independent accounting, of everything, before I agree to anything. My mother turned to him as though slapped. You too? Mom, you told me he opted out. You told me that for 9 years. The meeting ended there. Martin left his card. I drove home with the quiet in my chest that comes after a system has been properly shut down for inspection, not repaired yet, but no longer pressurized. The weeks that followed were not fast or dramatic. They were procedural. Martin filed a formal petition for accounting review. The brokerage froze distributions from the legacy fund pending investigation. An independent fiduciary was appointed to audit 9 years of trust activity. My mother retained her own attorney. She fought the petition initially, claimed I was manipulating the situation, claimed Martin was biased, claimed the trust's discretionary language gave her authority she fully exercised. Each defense met a document. Each document met silence. The independent audit completed in 11 weeks. Its findings, $387,000 in trust income had been diverted over 9 years to the unauthorized brokerage account. 0 distributions had been made to Elijah's legally mandated education account. The certification letter was confirmed as fraudulent. The trustee had materially breached her fiduciary duty under 6 separate provisions. The court removed my mother as trustee in February. A professional fiduciary, A woman named Sandra Chen was appointed in her place. Elijah's education account was opened, funded retroactively to the year of his birth. The legacy fund was restructured to include all grandchildren equally. My mother was ordered to repay $43,000 in trustee fees she had collected while in breach. Grant and Vanessa voluntarily returned $62,000 from the legacy fund distributions they'd received, a decision Vanessa drove, according to Grant, who called me the night before to tell me it was happening. Grant and I don't speak often, but we speak differently now. The last time he called, he said something brief. I should have asked questions years ago. I didn't want to know. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer it, but I didn't hang up either. Some conversations are just scaffolding, not the structure itself, but the thing that holds space while you build. Vanessa sent Elijah a birthday card in January. Inside, a $50 gift card to the bookstore, and a note in her handwriting. For whatever you want, no strings. It was real. It was also 5 years late. I let Elijah keep it and buy 3 books about dinosaurs and 1 about space. I didn't write a thank you note on his behalf. He wrote his own. My mother has not spoken to me since the court's ruling. I hear through Grant that she refers to the situation as Daniel's betrayal. I hear she's told her church circle that I hired a lawyer to steal from her. The story she tells is not the story that happened, but I've stopped correcting narratives I didn't create. My name is in the court record. The documents speak for themselves. Elijah started 3rd grade this fall at Eastbrook Elementary. His teacher, Miss Hendricks, told me at the parent conference that he's kind, unusually kind for a boy his age, she said. He shares his supplies without being asked. He notices when someone's sitting alone. I didn't tell her where he learned that. I just said thank you, and drove home past the street where my father's house still stands, where my mother still lives, where a walnut table my father built by hand still holds the weight of whatever story she tells about who we are. Last Saturday, I took Elijah to Ashworth's Steakhouse. Just us. We sat at a two-top by the window, not the private dining room, not the long table. The window, where the parking lot lights come in amber, and the menu arrives without anyone having pre-decided what you're allowed to order. He ordered the ribeye, medium, with mashed potatoes and a root beer. I didn't pre-order for him. I didn't order for him at all. He opened the menu himself, found what he wanted, and told the waitress in his own voice. The plate came, and it came for him, and he ate it with the easy confidence of a child who has never once been asked to earn his chair. The bill was $142 for 2. I paid it without calculating what it proved or what it cost in any currency beyond dollars. Because a meal is just a meal, until someone uses it to measure whether you belong. Here is what I've come to understand in the months since that dining room. Silence inside a family is not neutral, it is never neutral. When my father stood in doorways drying cups he'd already dried, when Grant accepted explanations he knew were false, when I logged insults like anomalous readings and kept walking the line, every silence was a vote. A vote to leave the system pressurized, a vote to let the fracture grow. I don't blame them for not speaking sooner. I didn't speak sooner either. Silence in these systems isn't cowardice, it's survival. But survival is not the same thing as safety. And there comes a point where the only way to protect the people downstream is to shut the system down and report what you found. My father couldn't stand up to her. He told me that in a parking lot once, like a confession. I believe him. I also believe that Elijah deserved at least one person in this family willing to stand where the pressure was highest and say out loud what the readings showed. If the people responsible for protecting you were instead quietly redirecting what was yours to someone they valued more, and doing it with a smile, and doing it with your name, and doing it with the full administrative precision of someone who has confused control with love, what would you do with the first moment you overheard the truth? This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminded you that your dignity is not negotiable, and that setting a boundary, even a painful one, can be an act of love for yourself and everyone the pattern would have reached next.